Welcome back. Hour number 2 of the Pete Wilson program on KGO. I want to jump right into this because this hour will go very, very quickly, I guarantee you. We're doing something today rather extraordinary for KGO. For the first time, maybe ever, on this station, 2 hosts on 2 different shows have purposely booked the same guest in a 48-hour period. Ron did it yesterday. I'm doing it today. My reasons are straightforward. Vincent Bugliosi's new book is 1,600-plus pages long. It's called Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I do not expect many people to read it cover to cover. What I'm suggesting is that you get a copy and you read his introduction and his remarkable reproduction of the actual events called 4 Days in November. Or you read his biography of Lee Harvey Oswald, which is, I think, the best yet, and read his final chapters on Oliver Stone's movie JFK and on conspiracy theories in question. Then put it on the shelf. And every time you're tempted to buy either the books themselves or the notions in the books of some 1,000 other authors who've written about this that are out there suggesting conspiracy, that Oswald was a patsy, that the Mafia, the Cubans, the CIA, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, the Russians, the military-industrial complex, the Bilderbergs, the John Birch Society, the Illuminati, Procter & Gamble, and Professor Dumbledore did it. Pull out Bugliosi's book. When you hear the Warren Commission was a cover-up, that there were 2 autopsies, the FBI lied, and the same people brought down the World Trade Center, when some lying, obfuscating con artist or just some American-hating, highly talented but moronic hypocrite with a movie camera and a fat budget tells you it's all an illusion, pick up this remarkable book and get reacquainted with facts and reason and critical thinking and logic, and the difference between those and simple belief. It is long since time when the majority of Americans stop believing in this nonsense and get a grip and realize 44 years have passed and gone by, and there still isn't one shred, not one tiny shred of evidence the assassination of JFK was pulled off by anyone other than one pathetic, neurotic, damaged Marxist halfwit with an old Italian rifle and an overabundance of arrogance. Oswald did it. Period. At least, I think Vincent Bugliosi proves that beyond all speculation. And he is in the studio this afternoon. This is some doorstopper of a thing here. And you just told me 22 years.
Well, close to 21, actually. And I want to apologize to your listener. My voice is going out. Last night, in the middle of the night, I literally could not talk, but they've been giving me a spray, so we're going to be able to make it through it.
Air conditioning in some
Normally,
hotel.
I don't sound this way, and I apologize to your audience.
Well, I certainly...
It was close to 21 years. In a sense, I felt many times that I bit off more than I can chew, but I think I succeeded. The interesting thing about this case, Ron, is that at its core...
It's Pete. Ron was yesterday.
I'm sorry, Ron. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Pete, I know you're Pete. I've been working around the clock. I know exactly who you are. I know Ron Hose, and I know exactly who you are. Pete, the interesting thing about this case is that at its core, this is a very simple case. Mm-hmm. Within hours of the shooting in Dealey Plaza, virtually everyone in Dallas law enforcement, Dallas PD, sheriff's office, local office of the FBI, they knew that Oswald had killed Kennedy. And when they found out what a tremendous kook he was, they said, no one's going to conspire with this guy. And I would say within 24 hours, virtually everyone in Dallas law enforcement knew exactly what happened. Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. That's one reality, a simple case. Chief Justice Earl Warren said when he was DA up in Oakland, he said this would have been a 3-day murder case if the victim had been anyone other than the President of the United States. But there's another reality here, Pete, and here's what that reality is. Because of the unceasing and fanatical obsession of literally, and I'm not exaggerating here, literally thousands upon thousands of Warren Commission critics, conspiracy theorists, throughout the entire world, mostly in the United States, but throughout the world, who have investigated every single conceivable aspect of this case for close to 44 years and made hundreds upon hundreds of allegations. This simple case has been transformed into its present shape or form, and I'll tell you what that present form is. It's now the most complex murder case by far in world history. Nothing even remotely comes close
Is it really that, or is it just a rabbit hole? That because of all of these different voices and all of this speculation, we have created this complicated thing out of what was a fairly simple thing.
Yes, well, at its core it remains, that's a very good point, at its core it remains a very simple case. But it's no longer simple because of these outrageous allegations. Just to give you an example, in manuscript form, one of my endnotes, there's 1,125 pages of endnotes.
By the way, you've got to read the endnotes all the way through the book. But go ahead.
They're very important. I'm not talking about the narrative now, the main text. One of my endnotes on acoustics runs to 120 pages with about 60 footnotes. So I agree with you, this is still, at this very moment, a simple case, but it's been transformed. If you want to write the definitive book about the case, you have to address yourself to all these issues.
Was the seminal moment in the process of creating this myth in the minds of the American people, and the polls all say the vast majority of us believe it was a conspiracy, with the help of Oliver Stone and a lot of other fools, was that moment when Ruby killed Oswald and took away any chance we'd have of getting Oswald to say what happened?
Certainly one of the biggest things that has caused American people to believe in a conspiracy is when Ruby supposedly silenced Oswald.
Right.
Now, when you make that statement, silenced Oswald for the mob, that presupposes that Oswald killed Kennedy for the mob.
Right.
If he didn't, why would they be silencing him? With respect to Ruby, the Warren Commission and the FBI conducted an extremely thorough investigation of Ruby, found no evidence that he was ever a mobster, a member of the mafia. However, he was the type of guy that liked to give off intimations that he had mob connections. Sure, yeah. He'd wear a fedora cap like Al Capone. But here's an interesting point. He volunteered to take a polygraph test. Now, polygraph tests per se are not that accurate. But to me, very few defendants who are guilty volunteer to take a polygraph test. He took a polygraph test and he passed it. But beyond that, he's the last guy you would go to be a hitman. Here's a guy, I don't know if you know it, very close to Dallas law enforcement. He was very close. He was a police buff. He hung out at the police station. And he was a snitch. He was always snitching on people who he thought were committing crimes to the Dallas Police Department.
The inside material on this is just fascinating. I think one of the things that this book does, as Helter Skelter did in other books that Vincent Bugliosi has written over the years, is to show you how the mind of a truly great prosecutor works. And I'm blowing smoke, but it's actually the truth. For instance, he asks simple questions that the conspiracy theorists never ask. He says, if you're going to rub out Oswald, if the mafia orders you to go in and kill Oswald, in the case of Ruby, you do it the first time you're within 3 feet of him. 2 days before he actually did. He actually did the killing, not 4 days after the killing took place, when Oswald has spent the good part of that 4 days talking to the police.
Of course. That's just common sense, which Voltaire tells us is not that common. Getting back to Ruby, not only is he a snitch, not only is he a close friend of Dallas law enforcement. In fact, just before he shot Oswald, one of the detectives said, Jack. He knew him by his first name. Jack, you son of a beehiver. Okay. But also, he was a very emotionally and mentally disturbed and unbalanced individual who's constantly getting into fights at the Carousel Club, his girly club. He'd knock people down, throw them down the stairs. He had organic brain damage. He had 7 dogs, 6 of whom he called his children. The 7th, Sheba, he called his wife. A fellow by the name of Jack Revell, who was the detective in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Dallas Police Department. He testified before the House Select Committee in 1978, and he said, Jack Ruby was a buffoon, and I tell this committee this. I said, if Jack Ruby was a member of organized crime, then the personnel director of organized crime should be replaced. And isn't it interesting that everyone that knew Ruby down in Dallas, and he knew everyone. If there was a fire, he was there. He was a man about town. None of them give any credence to this. They laugh at the suggestion that this guy was a member of the mob, and yet some young kids on computers, I'm still in the 19th century with a yellow pad and pencil, but on the computer or internet or whatever it is, never met Ruby, but they're convinced that he was a big-time mobster in Dallas.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, again, organized crime is the term we use to refer to these people. So organized crime killed JFK. They hired Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby two misfits almost beyond description to do this. That isn't very organized, and it certainly isn't the organized crime we have come to know. Vincent Bugliosi is the guest. Reclaiming History. It is from Norton. I'm sorry, I almost said the wrong publisher. It's available on the Kgo book line if you can carry it from the mailbox. It is also at all major bookstores. Your point here is that the American people, out of, I don't know, maybe there's something in us that wants to believe it's more complicated than just one schlub with a gun. But you're trying to get back to the notion of facts here.
Yeah, Pete, there are many reasons why people believe in a conspiracy in this case, and we'll just touch on a couple of them. Ironically, this is going to be a surprise to many people. JFK is one of the reasons why we believe in a conspiracy in this case. JFK, as you know, had this irresistible charm. People liked John F. Kennedy. Yes. RFK, a lot of them loved him, but a lot of them hated him.
Yes.
But even his opponents liked JFK. Right. He was beloved. They say that his death was mourned by more people than any other human in world history. And in a sense, in a strange type of way, the belief that powerful forces killed Kennedy because he was taking the nation in a direction antithetical to their views gives more meaning to his life and death than the belief that some lone gunman with a deranged mind killed Kennedy. Jackie herself said that we don't even have the satisfaction that Kennedy, my husband, was killed for some cause, like civil rights. He had to be killed by some silly little communist, and it robs the president's death of meaning. But let me just put this little tag onto it here. In all deference to LBJ, and again I apologize for my voice, all deference to LBJ. If LBJ had been killed under the same identical, precise circumstances as JFK, do you really think that close to 44 years later there'd be this tremendous interest in the assassination? I don't think so. So in a very strange type of way, JFK, people are hanging on to him. They don't want to let go, and subliminally, without even thinking about it.
I suppose it's like the Brits and Diana. You know, we are still clinging to the conspiracy that somehow this was a greater force rather than just one drunken limousine driver.
Yeah. People find it intellectually incongruous that someone whom they perceive to be a king, i.e., President Kennedy, here's a guy who's captivating the world with his wit, his charm, his intelligence. He's driving down the street. He's smiling. He's on top of the world. And a second later, it's all over with. And they say something more just had to be involved. And they perceived Oswald to be someone like he's a non-entity. Something more had to be involved. Of course, bullets are very democratic. They kill or injure whomever they hit, and you don't have to be important to pull the trigger.
You know, you were intimately involved with another schlub doing an enormous amount of damage, and that is Charlie Manson.
Charles Manson.
Hinckley. I mean, the list of these little people doing these kinds of things goes on and on and on, and yet we always want to make it this, somehow this perfect conspiracy of literally hundreds of people that had to come together and hit every point exactly correctly to pull this off for 44 years without anybody figuring it out.
Well, if I could just take a minute or two to elaborate on your point here. There's no credible, let's underline the word credible, evidence that the CIA or mob or any of these other groups were involved in the assassination. And I told the jury in London, you know, I prosecuted Oswald in London in 1986. Jerry Spence defended him. No script. The script was our pad. We had the original Warren Commission witnesses. I said, you know, folks, I says, 3 people can keep a secret. I said, I'll stipulate to that, but only if 2 are dead. And here we have a situation now close to 44 years later. Not one word, not one syllable is leaked out because there's nothing to leak out. Secondly, there's a couple points I want to make here. Secondly, there's no evidence that Oswald ever had any association with any of these groups. And Harold Weisberg, one of the most prominent conspiracy researchers,
and one that you respect because he meant it.
Yes.
Right.
Even he said, you know, they checked out, referring to the FBI, every breath this guy ever breathed. From the moment he arrived back in the United States from the Soviet Union on June 13th, 1962, they found 25,000 interviews, not one speck of evidence that he had any association with any of these groups. Let's take it to a third step. let's assume that one of these groups, like the CIA, do you know who was the head of the CIA at the time? John McCone, a family friend of the Kennedys. JFK appointed him CIA director. But let's say McCone, for whatever reason, decided to murder John F. Kennedy. Oswald would have been one of the last people on the face of the earth whom he would have gone to. Why? I'll tell you why. He was not an expert shot. He was a good shot, but not an expert shot. He had a $12 mail-order rifle. Notoriously unreliable, and Pete, extremely unstable. His wife said he'd only be happy on the moon.
Well, his brother and his wife, his brother, who you spent a lot of time on, clearly underlines that over and over again. Absolutely. This is a damaged guy.
Here's a guy that defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. Even today, who in the world defects to the Soviet Union? And he gets over there. He wants to become a Soviet citizen. They turn him down. What does he do? He tries to commit suicide. He slashes his wrist, just the type of person that the CIA or mob would like to rely on to commit the biggest murder in American history. But there's one follow-up line, if we can do it now or after the break.
Right now.
Okay. Assuming for the sake of argument that one of these groups decided to kill Kennedy, and for whatever crazy, bizarre reason, they wanted Oswald to do it, and he went along with it. Let's see if where that takes us makes any sense. After Oswald shot Kennedy in Dealey Plaza and left the book depository building, one of two things would have happened. Let me tell you the least likely thing first. The least likely thing is that there would have been a car waiting for him to help him escape down to Mexico or wherever. Certainly the conspirators would not want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. But the most likely thing by far that would have happened, and Pete, you're a very sharp guy, you already know what I'm going to say, there would have been a car waiting for him to drive him to his death. You know that would have happened. And yet we have Oswald out on the street with $13 in his pocket trying to flag down buses and cabs.
And shooting Tippit in the process.
Yeah, yes.
It's just, again...
It's all moonshine. It's all moonshine.
What Vince Bugliosi is trying to do today is nearly impossible, and that is explain a book that is so intricate in its detail, and by the way, so well written, as he has proven he can do over the years, that the two things are almost impossible to do. He is generalizing about something that is so extraordinary in its collection of facts that it makes the other books about this case pale in comparison. 328, the Pete Wilson program on KGO. We have a lot of people on the line, and we're going to devote the next half hour to those phone calls if Vince doesn't mind. He is something of a stem winder, so I'm going to have to control him here. We will do that in the second hour. 8080810. You can email us at kgo.com. And at 3:33, back on the Pete Wilson program, Vincent Bugliosi is our guest. His remarkable new book, 22 years in the making, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He told me off the air that he did this all by his lonesome. His notes, his research, trying to put this together, trying to make the narrative work over a lengthy period of time. No computers. Little microfiche. That's about all. All right. It's
yellow pad and pencil and the microfilm. But of course, I got a lot of books on an interlibrary loan from all over the country.
Yeah, and a lot of interviews as well. If you put those headphones on for me, Vince, we'll take a couple of phone calls here. Jim in Oakland, thanks for waiting. Jim, go ahead, please.
Hey guys, quick story, quick question. I remember 1979, 1980. The book came out. Written by a scholarly author, about 400 pages long, that hypothesized that a KGB double was the gunman, and he was the one that was buried in the Oswald grave. And this book was so factual and so credible that the buzz around the country, I remember it at the time, is that this guy has really cracked the case. And he was so convincing that a Dallas judge ordered the exhumation of the body that was in that gravesite, and lo and behold, it turned out to be Oswald.
Right.
And I remember celebrating at the time because there's so few times that these theories can just be shot dead and put to rest, and we never heard a peep from that author again. But my question is this. How is it that smart people, smart authors, a House Senate subcommittee with smart staffers and smart senators get taken down these tracks and believe this stuff? Is it that we think we're smarter if we hear zebras instead of hoofbeats when we think horses? I mean, is it?
Well, let's get a response, Jim. It's a great question. Really, it's at the center of this whole thing.
But I don't really know the exact answer as to why we want to go down these crazy paths. But I will say this, that I believe that most conspiracy theorists, I'm talking about those that go to the conventions and get newsletters, I think most of them are sincere. They're patriotic, certifiably psychotic when it comes to this issue. But, doctors, lawyers, etc. But I think they truly believe in all this nonsense. The conspiracy
but if you're honest and you're a believer, why do you lie about things? Why do you eliminate facts and so on?
They do not know that they're lying.
Yeah.
All they're reading is conspiracy books. The conspiracy authors, on the other hand, they've got the volumes, not the theorists that attend the conventions. The authors have the books, they have the volumes, and they absolutely, deliberately distort the official record. Yeah. So we have to distinguish between those that know they're lying and these silly people out there who believe all this nonsense.
In other words, what you're saying here is that nobody that has actually read the 27 volumes of the Warren Commission report is going to say that it was a cursory
Of course not. Anyone who tells me that, I know that they haven't looked at it, because it's not 27 volumes of fluff. This is very serious information.
CJ is our next caller in Gilroy this afternoon. CJ, how are you?
Fine. Thanks for taking my call. I have one correction of fact to make and then one question. The correction fact is Lee Harvey Oswald was killed the day after President Kennedy was killed, not 4 days later. And Jack Ruby had only one other chance to do it, and that was in the corridor when Oswald was being moved down from the interrogation room into another office.
On Friday, right.
So
Friday evening. But what's the correction you're making?
I said 4 days, and it's actually really...
Wilson said 4 days later.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Okay, now, the question is this. When Lee Harvey Oswald was moved down that corridor, somebody asked him, why did you kill the president? He said, I did not kill the president. He said, I did not kill anyone. He said, I'm a patsy. He said, I need a lawyer. Please, someone get me a lawyer. Now, if we compare that to John Wilkes Booth, who killed Abraham Lincoln, in a rather braggadocious style, why wouldn't he be strutting down that corridor full of fluff saying, I killed the president, instead of saying, I didn't do it, get me a lawyer?
Well, the answer very quickly is he didn't because he didn't. But explain to CJ what you're talking about.
CJ, you left out an important number of words that Oswald said. The general belief by conspiracy theorists is that Oswald said he was a patsy. The implication being in the Oliver Stone movie and everywhere that he was talking about some group of conspirators who killed Kennedy and framed him for the murder that they committed. But that's not the context in which he said it. They asked him if he killed the president. He said, no, I defected to the Soviet Union. That's why they're charging me with this crime. He wasn't talking about a group of conspirators. Right. He was talking about Dallas law enforcement.
In fact, he denied any connection with this over and over and over again. He denied that he possessed a rifle, even though the police presented him with the obvious evidence that he was pretty sharp.
He said, well, they superimposed my head upon someone else's body. But this patsy thing was strictly in the context of, I defected to the Soviet Union, and that's why they're charging me for this crime. It had nothing to do with any group of conspirators behind him.
Let's talk to Roger.
So, CJ, you should go back and look at the
Yeah, but again, they're selective. Everybody is selective about this. Right. Roger in San Francisco is not selective. He's on the air.
Yes, thank you. You know, the problem simply is that they cannot believe this cipher could have caused this much damage. But let me give you an insight. I was in the Marine Corps at the same time Oswald was in us. We had to hit a target at 500 yards. He fired sharpshooter. He was not a bad shot. He was quite capable of doing it. So to draw any kind of inference that he could not have done it, it's nonsense. Marines are trained extremely well with rifles. That I think you may check me on this, Vince, but I think it's only less than 100 yards he had a fire on this.
Let's talk about that for just a moment. The conspiracy theorists lie and say he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but you're right, in the military, he was a sharpshooter. He fired a .212. They also say that was a very difficult shot up there. I've been up to the window, and if you imagine holding a rifle, the barrel of the rifle is on a straight line with Elm Street. The limousine is going 11.5 miles an hour, very, very slowly. There's a 3.9-degree declination of Elm Street, and the relevance of that is that it eliminates the necessity of elevating the muzzle as the limousine gets farther away from the window. The two shots, you want to know that the distance of those two shots, Roger. The first shot that hit the president was 59 yards. The second, 88 yards. On the range, as you know, it's 100, 200, 300, and 500. So it wasn't that far at all. And also, how difficult was it? We have to assume that he's aiming at the head. That's the most vulnerable spot. The first shot misses the limousine completely. The second shot hits the upper right back, meaning he missed the head, and the third shot, he hits the target, the head. That's 1 out of 3 shots. Not that great. In London, I asked my firearms guy from Wisconsin at the London trial, I said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was the president essentially a stationary target? He says, yes, he was essentially a stationary target. Not that difficult a shot.
Perhaps, as Vince points out, in one of the wonderful little addendums to this story, and I mean, there are 1,000 of them, is that his illness, the fact that he had to wear a very heavy brace because of a very complicated medical difficulty with Addison's disease, in fact, made it almost impossible for him to bend after the first shot or to get out of the way. He was rigid.
Yes, that was not my position, but a doctor Dr. Latimer, he studied this case for years, and he came to that conclusion, which made a lot of sense, that after the first shot, Connolly bent over, okay? Kennedy did not because of that brace. He had to stay up, and that third fatal shot at 3:13 hit him in the head.
Shot. Exactly. 341, the Pete Wilson Program on KGO. .344, the Pete Wilson Program on KGO. Let me get another phone call here, and then I have to take a quick traffic break. But Jeff in Green Bay joins us. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Pete. I would like their guests to imagine a Marine sharpshooter defecting to the country of Iran, then coming back to this country, being allowed in with his mental background, and purchasing a weapon and getting anywhere close to President Bush. I'm not suggesting that it was anyone other than Oswald. What I want to know, though, and what I think is amazing that we don't understand, is how our Secret Service, our CIA, our military, our intelligence allowed this to happen. And I think that why people are so ready to adopt a conspiracy theory is because there are no answers. The government.
All right, Jeff. Let's get a response, if I can. Vincent, taking into account the fact that this is now 44 years later, and we are a whole lot more paranoid and a great deal more secure now than we were before. But why? How did he get that rifle, given that background?
Well, he ordered it under his alias, A. Heidel, and they weren't checking that type of thing back then. No,
they had determined that he was a flake, that the trip to Moscow really... the
FBI had determined he was a flake, right. But when he ordered that rifle, there were no laws in place checking out who this person is, and he didn't use his real name.
We assume, the public assumes that, well, they must have had more security. They must have, because we assume it in light of what would have happened today had he defected, say, to I don't know, Pakistan or someplace.
Pete, during the presidential motorcade, there were 17 Secret Servicemen in that motorcade in Dealey Plaza, 34 eyes. Not one of them, when you read the report, even looked up at the book depository building.
And yet a lot of witnesses saw somebody up there.
A lot of spectators did. They saw a rifle sticking right out the window. Not one Secret Service agent looked up in that window.
I want to talk quickly, if we could, about the single bullet theory, the magic bullet, a wonderful chapter on this. It is very dense. You have to try slowly to digest this material, but where you go with this is fascinating to me.
Okay, well, let me try to condense this. The single bullet theory and the so-called magic bullet is a classic example of the extent to which the conspiracy theorists lie. They not only lie when there's documentary evidence to refute what they're saying, they literally are audacious enough to lie when there's even a film, a photograph, refuting them. Why? Because they know that maybe only 1 out of 100 people have access to that film or photograph. What they do in their sketches, Pete, they place Governor Connolly in the presidential limousine directly in front of President Kennedy. And he wasn't, but they place him there. And that was in the Oliver Stone movie. And they say a bullet coming from Oswald, passing from right to left, passing through soft tissue on a straight line, once it exited the president's throat, to hit Connolly would have had to make a right turn in midair and then a left turn to go on to hit Connolly. Now, if you start out with an erroneous premise, everything that follows makes a heck of a lot of sense. The only problem is that it's wrong. Connolly, we know, was not seated directly in front of Kennedy in the presidential limousine. There's all types of photographs. It's a Zapruder film. He was seated on a jump seat a half a foot in to the president's left front. So the orientation of Connolly's body vis-a-vis Kennedy's was such that a bullet passing on a straight line through soft tissue had nowhere else to go except to hit Governor Connolly. Now, at the trial in London, because this is important, Spence calls Dr. Cyril Wecht. I don't know if you know what Dr.
I know Cyril Wecht very well. I've interviewed him many times.
He calls Dr. Cyril Wecht to the stand, and he says, Doctor, why don't you characterize this bullet for us? And Wecht says, well, it's a magic bullet. Bullets don't even do this in cartoons, make right and left turns in midair. And on cross-examination, I said, now, Doctor, if this bullet came from the right to the left, and you acknowledge that it passed through soft tissue on a straight line, if it did not go on to hit Governor Connolly, why didn't it tear up the interior of the limousine or the driver? He said, I don't know. I didn't conduct the investigation. And I said, well, now, Doctor, it seems like you have your own magic bullet. I said, if it didn't hit Connolly, didn't hit the interior of the limousine, didn't hit the driver or anyone else, it must have zigzagged to the left. And he says, no, it need not have zigzagged to the left. I said, well, did it hop, skip, and jump over the car? He said, no, it need not have performed any remarkable feat at all. And I said, well, then, Dr. Wecht, tell this Dallas jury, it was a Dallas jury, but the trial's in London, right. Tell these folks in the Dallas jury what happened to that bullet after it exited the front of the president's throat. His answer, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So if we're to believe the conspiracy theorists, they're the ones that got the magic bullet. The bullet exits the front of the president's throat, doesn't hit Connolly, the interior of the limousine or anything. Apparently it just vanished without a trace into thin air. They're the only ones that have a magic bullet, and yet, Pete, the conspiracy theorists have wrapped this magic bullet around the thread of the throat of the Warren Commission for close to 44 years, and millions of people think that the Warren Commission has a magic bullet. The only people that do are the conspiracy theorists.
Just 1 minute with Vincent Bugliosi. I want you to, it's impossible to sum this up, but essentially what you're saying here is that after all these years, we have an enormous amount of information. None of it points to conspiracy.
Absolutely not. There's not a speck, not one speck. Everything, however, points towards Oswald's guilt. Mm-hmm. And, it's difficult for me to speak candidly about this book without sounding boastful, but the alternative is even worse.
Yeah.
Because if I don't speak candidly, people are going to say, well, there's just one of a thousand other books on the case. But it's not. And like the LA Times says, finally someone has put all the pieces together. Reclaiming History is a book for the ages.
Not just selecting things or selecting half a comment without the comma in the middle of a sentence. Right. I mean, again, Vincent Bugliosi, again, folks, just get the book. Read when you have the time. Read this, read that. When you have a question, read this, read that. And reacquaint yourself with how someone actually determines what happened. Vince, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Pete, for having me on the show. I deeply appreciate it, and I mean that.
Enjoyed it immensely. This is KGO.
Thank you, Pete.